There is an interesting legend that has come to us by way of European folklore in which it is said that newborn babies are delivered by way of stork. Perhaps you have heard of the legend, perhaps you once believed in the legend, or maybe you still do. It is a ridiculous notion, of course. Newborn babies are definitely not carried by a stork and gracefully dropped into the laps of hopeful, expectant mothers. I never believed that story. However, had you told me that a stork carried music chords and gracefully dropped them into the laps of hopeful, expectant musicians and songwriters, I probably would have believed you. What is the deal with chords anyway? Where do they come from? Let's talk about that a little bit more in today's weekly worship thought. If you haven't already done so, make sure that you go to my website, www.jeffpolenmusic.com, and download the Becoming a Musical Ninja worksheet. We've been using it for the last several chapters. Take time to work through the exercises in the worksheet. I really believe those exercises in the worksheet will help you to better grasp this material and help you along the way to becoming a musical ninja yourself. When I was much younger, I used to place my fingers randomly on the fretboard of a guitar or haphazardly on the family piano and just hope against hope that my fingers had magically discovered a chord. Nope. Whatever terrible sound I had concocted, it definitely was not a chord, or at least not a chord that anyone musical would ever consider using in a song. I was dumbfounded. Where exactly did chords come from? Well, I later found out exactly where chords come from, and I want to share that knowledge with you. First though, I should warn you, this is a very simple explanation of chordal theory, and much more could be said on the subject. Now, because the vast majority of contemporary Western music uses only the notes within the key of a song, I will stick to explaining just the typical major and minor chords within a given key. Now let's recap what we already know from the previous chapters. There are 12 possible notes for any given key. There's A sharp or B flat, B, C sharp or D flat, D sharp or E flat, E, F sharp or G flat, G, and G sharp or A flat. While there are 12 possible notes for any given key actually only uses 7 of those 12 possible notes. You can figure out what 7 notes are in a given key by using the following formula: root, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Notice that there will technically be 8 total notes in each key, but the root note and the last note of the formula will always be the same note, just one octave apart. Let's talk about the chords within the key, as well as which chords are major and which chords are minor. Still recap. Each note in the key can be turned into a chord. The formula we use to find the notes will also tell you which number each chord will represent. So let's look at that quickly. The root note would be the 1 chord. A whole step up from the root, which is the equivalent to 2 half steps, would be our 2 chord. A whole step up from the 2 would be the 3 chord. Following the formula, we would take a half step next. A half step from our 3 chord is the 4 chord. Then a whole step from the 4 chord gives us the 5 chord. A whole step from the 5 chord gives us the 6 chord. A whole step from the 6 chord gives us the 7 chord. And finally, one last half step from the 7 chord should land us one full octave up from the 1 chord, which is now our 8 chord. And we also know that the 1, 4, and 5 are major chords, while the 2, 3, and 6 are minor chords. The 7 is diminished, and we won't worry about that for now, as it typically only applies to adding a bass note to the 5 chord. With all of this information in mind, we are officially ready to understand where chords come from. It's simple, really. Well, if you were able to understand everything that I've said so far, then this last part should be simple. Using the major scale formula that we already talked about, root, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we find the major chords by using the 1, 3, and 5 of the chords major scale. Now that's very important. An E chord, for instance, uses the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the E major scale. So the notes in the E major scale would be E, which is the 1, F sharp, which is the 2, G sharp is the 3, A, which is the 4, B, which is the 5, C sharp is the 6, D sharp is the 7, and lastly, the 8 is E. Therefore, the notes in the E chord are E, which is the 1, G sharp, which is the 3, and B, which is the 5. This formula works for any major chord in any key. However, it is important to point out that to find the notes in a chord, you have to use the major scale of the chord you are trying to find, and not the major scale of the key of the song. For instance, The 4 chord in the key of E is the A chord. To find the notes in the A chord, you have to use the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the A major scale, which is the chord, not of the E major scale, which is the key. So, what are the notes in the A major scale? The A is the 1, B is the 2, C sharp is the 3, D is the 4, E is the 5, F sharp is the 6, G sharp is the 7, and the 8th is an octave up from the root, which is an A. Therefore, the notes in the A chord are the 1 and the 3 and the 5, or A, which is the 1, C sharp, which is the 3, and E, which is the 5. To discover the notes within a minor chord, you use a similar formula, but you have to go 1/2 step down from the 3rd note of the chord's major scale. In the key of E, the 6th chord would be C sharp minor. Let's find the notes within the C sharp minor chord by locating the 1, the flattened 3rd, and the 5 of the C sharp major scale, which is C sharp 1, D sharp 2, E sharp 3, F sharp 4, G sharp 5, A sharp 6, B sharp 7, and C sharp 8. Now you may be freaking out a little bit about the E sharp and the B sharp notes. I totally understand. It's weird and it feels wrong, but it's not. See, in order for a major scale to be written correctly, it needs to include all 7 possible letters. Therefore, when writing out the C sharp major scale, we needed to use an E sharp instead of an F and a B sharp instead of a C. Now, back to the notes that make up the C sharp minor chord. Don't forget that the 3rd note in the scale has to be flattened or dropped 1/2 step lower in order to create a minor chord. So the notes that make up the C sharp minor chord are C sharp 1, the flattened 3rd is an E, and G sharp, which is our 5. Now you may be really excited about what you're learning, or you may be wondering why any of this actually matters. We have covered a lot today, so I don't want to go much further with this, but let me just give you a quick idea of how this could be super helpful. Let's take the G chord for instance. The individual notes that make up the G chord are G, B, and D. When I play a typical G chord, I am playing a G on the 1st string, an open B on the 2nd string, an open G on the 3rd string, an open D on the 4th string, a B on the 5th string, and a G on the 6th string. So the notes from low to high then are G, B, D, G, B, and G again, okay? G, B, D, G, B, G. Perfect. Now, what if I wanted to change that chord around a little bit? Well, I could change the open B on the 2nd string to a D on the 2nd string by applying my ring finger here to the 2nd fret. Now we're still playing a G chord. It's just a slightly different voicing, but we are still playing a G chord because we still have a G, a B, and a D. Now what if I wanted to play a G chord up higher on the neck? Well, that's simple. I just have to make sure that I'm still playing a G, a B, and a D, and I'll still be playing a G chord. For instance, let's use this fun little G formation right here, okay? We're gonna play a B on the 1st string, a G on the 2nd string, a D on the 3rd string, and a G on the 4th string. And this is what it sounds like. By ensuring that the correct notes are being played in whatever order you decide, you can start playing chord voicings all over the guitar or the piano or whatever instrument you are using. And as for vocalists, where do you think those beautiful harmonies come from? Well, that's right. Harmony vocals come from this exact same idea. When a lead vocalist is singing a note, harmony vocalists can sing the 3rd and the 5th above or below that note. And just like that, we have a harmonious vocal chord. No pun intended. Well, actually I did intend it. Pun intended. What was one interesting truth or idea that stood out to you today? And how do you think that truth or idea will help you in the future? Was there anything confusing or too difficult to understand in this chapter? If so, what do you think you could do to learn more about it? Why do you think this information about where chords come from is important? How does knowing about it help you? How would not knowing about it potentially lead to issues or limitations? Do you ever think about any of the key concepts that were shared in this chapter? If so, in what ways? If not, do you think these concepts just come naturally for you, or do you think that perhaps this is an area that you really need to grow in? In your own words, How do you think this concept fits into the big picture of learning the Nashville numbers system?